For decades, fans believed the cast of Good Times shared the same warmth and closeness off-camera that they showed every week on television. The Evans family looked united, loving, and inseparable. But according to Jimmie Walker, the truth behind the scenes was very different. Walker, the comedian who became famous for the explosive catchphrase, "Dynamite," has spent years addressing rumors about tension inside the cast. In interviews and in his memoir, he revealed that two of the show's most respected stars, Esther Rolle and John Amos, were not close with him at all. In fact, Walker says they barely spoke outside of filming. Now, after decades of speculation, Walker has openly confirmed what many fans suspected all along. The Evans family bond that viewers loved every week did not exist when the cameras stopped rolling. The show that changed television. When Good Times first appeared on television, it immediately stood out from almost everything else on American TV. Created by legendary producer Norman Lear, the series centered on a working-class African-American family living in a Chicago housing project. At a time when many sitcoms avoided serious social themes, Good Times tackled difficult realities directly. Episodes addressed racism, poverty, unemployment, school busing, and even sexually transmitted diseases. Yet despite those struggles, the Evans family remained loving and resilient. Week after week, audiences watched them face hardship together while maintaining humor and dignity. The emotional center of the family was Florida Evans, played by Esther Rolle. Florida was written as a deeply moral and strong mother who guided her children through the harsh realities of life in the city. Her husband, James Evans, portrayed by John Amos, was equally strong-willed and proud. Together, they represented a rare portrayal of a stable black family on television, something that had rarely been seen before. But while the parents carried the moral weight of the show, it was the eldest son who unexpectedly captured the nation's attention. J.J. Evans, played by Jimmie Walker, was introduced as a lanky teenager who loved art, loved women, and seemed to float through life with a mischievous grin. Walker, already a rising stand-up comedian before joining the series, brought a style of comedy that was loud, expressive, and completely unpredictable. His exaggerated reactions and playful arrogance quickly turned him into the show's comic engine. Then came the catchphrase that changed everything. "Dynamite!" exploded from Walker's character during one episode and immediately became a cultural phenomenon. Fans repeated it in schools, workplaces, and living rooms across the country. Suddenly, Jimmie Walker was no longer just another actor in a sitcom ensemble. He had become the breakout star of the entire show. The success of that catchphrase transformed the direction of the series. Producers noticed that audiences reacted most strongly whenever JJ delivered a big joke or dramatic reaction. As a result, scripts began shifting toward his character. Scenes increasingly focused on his antics, his jokes, and his larger-than-life personality. From a ratings standpoint, it worked. Viewers loved him, and the show remained popular. But behind the scenes, not everyone was happy about this shift. Esther Rolle and John Amos had originally believed that Good Times would highlight the struggles and strengths of an entire family. As the comedy surrounding JJ grew larger, they felt that the show's message was slowly changing. What had begun as a socially conscious family drama was turning into something more comedic and exaggerated. For the audience watching at home, the Evans family still appeared unified. The parents scolded their children, the siblings teased each other, and every episode ended with the family facing problems together. But away from the cameras, tensions were quietly forming that would eventually become one of the most discussed conflicts in television history. And at the center of that tension was the very character who had made the show famous, J.J. Evans. When success created a division. By the time Good Times became a national hit, the popularity of Jimmie Walker had reached a level that no one involved with the show had predicted. Audiences loved the exaggerated humor of J.J. Evans. They laughed at his constant flirtation with women, his flamboyant style, and the explosive way he shouted "Dynamite" whenever something exciting happened. The phrase quickly spread far beyond the television screen. Fans shouted it in schools, comedians used it in stand-up routines, and it became one of the most recognizable catchphrases in American television. But the very success that made Walker famous also created a serious divide behind the scenes. Esther Rolle, who played the family's strong and disciplined mother, had a very different vision for the show. From the beginning, Rolle believed Good Times should present a dignified and realistic portrayal of a black family navigating poverty and discrimination. She saw the series as an opportunity to challenge stereotypes that had long dominated American television. Florida Evans was written as a proud, responsible woman who demanded respect from her children and from society. As the show gained popularity, Rolle began noticing a change in the scripts. More and more episodes centered on JJ's antics instead of the family's struggles. Scenes that once focused on the parents' leadership and the children's growth were gradually replaced by exaggerated comedic moments built around Walker's character. To producers, the formula seemed obvious. Audiences laughed hardest when JJ dominated the scene. Rolle, however, believed something important was being lost. In interviews at the time, she openly criticized the direction of the character. She pointed out that JJ was supposed to be 18 years old, yet he did not have a job and rarely behaved responsibly. She worried that the character was being written in a way that made him appear foolish rather than capable. In one widely quoted statement, Rolle said that JJ could not read or write and did not think seriously about life. What troubled her most was the message she believed this portrayal might send to young viewers. Rolle feared that black teenagers watching the show might see JJ as proof that success could come from being loud and comedic rather than thoughtful and hardworking. She also noticed that the role of the younger brother Michael, originally written as an intelligent and politically aware child, was slowly being reduced. The balance of the Evans family was disappearing as the show leaned more heavily into Walker's comedic energy. John Amos, who played the father of the family, shared many of Rolle's concerns. Amos believed the show had started as a meaningful portrayal of family resilience, but was drifting toward what he later described as excessive buffoonery. He insisted that his objections were never about jealousy of Walker's popularity. Instead, he felt that focusing so heavily on one character diminished the importance of the rest of the family. For Walker, however, the situation looked completely different. He had come into the show as a stand-up comedian whose job was to make audiences laugh. When viewers responded enthusiastically to JJ, he simply did what any performer would do. He leaned into the humor that people enjoyed. Walker did not write the scripts, nor did he control the direction of the show. Producers made those decisions, and they were guided by ratings. According to Walker, he did not even realize how strongly Rolle and Amos felt about the character during the early years of the show. He was busy building a career outside the series, performing stand-up comedy in clubs almost every night after filming ended. Once the cameras stopped rolling, he often left the studio immediately to meet with his writing staff and prepare for live performances. This difference in priorities meant that Walker and his co-stars rarely interacted outside of filming. They performed their scenes together professionally, but when the day's work ended, they went their separate ways. To viewers watching from home, the Evans family still looked united. On screen, they laughed, argued, and supported one another through difficult situations. But away from the bright lights of the studio, the actors themselves were beginning to drift apart. And as the disagreements over JJ's role grew louder, the atmosphere behind the scenes became colder than most fans could have imagined. The silence set. As the debate about JJ's character intensified, the atmosphere behind the scenes of Good Times grew noticeably colder. Viewers at home saw a lively family full of laughter and arguments that always ended in unity. But according to Jimmie Walker, the cast members themselves were not nearly as close as audiences imagined. Years later, Walker spoke candidly about those years in interviews and in his memoir, Din O' Might. Good Times, Bad Times, Our Times. What he described surprised many fans who had always believed the cast functioned like a real family. Walker explained that when filming ended each day, the actors rarely interacted with one another. In fact, he claimed that his relationship with Esther Rolle and John Amos was almost non-existent outside of the scenes they performed together. In one particularly revealing interview with the Television Academy, Walker said something that stunned longtime viewers of the show. He admitted that he could not remember ever having a real conversation with Rolle during the entire time they worked together. "I don't remember ever speaking a word to Esther the whole time she was there," he said. Rolle had appeared in the first several seasons of the show, briefly leaving before returning for the final stretch. Despite spending years portraying mother and son on television, Walker insisted that the two actors barely interacted when the cameras were not rolling. He made a similar statement about Amos. According to Walker, their communication during the early years of the show was extremely limited. They performed scenes together professionally, but that was the extent of their interaction. "We were never friends," Walker said plainly. "We never talked." To emphasize the distance between them, he explained that if someone had asked him at the time to call Rolle or Amos, he would not have been able to do it. He did not have their phone numbers and had no personal connection with them outside the workplace. The comment surprised many fans because the Evans family appeared so close on television. Florida Evans protected her children fiercely, while James Evans tried to guide them with discipline and pride. Their arguments with JJ often felt authentic, but viewers assumed that the actors shared a bond behind the scenes. Walker's version of events suggested something very different. According to him, the cast functioned more like co-workers than family members. They arrived on set, performed their scenes, and left to pursue their own lives. Part of the reason, Walker explained, was simply the pace of his career during those years. While Good Times was filming, he was simultaneously building a national reputation as a stand-up comedian. As soon as filming wrapped each day, he often rushed out to meet his writing staff before performing at comedy clubs that evening. His schedule left little time for socializing with fellow cast members. There was also the underlying tension about the direction of the show. Rolle and Amos had already expressed their dissatisfaction publicly, criticizing the portrayal of JJ as exaggerated and unrealistic. Those disagreements created an uncomfortable environment that made personal friendships unlikely. Yet despite all of this, Walker has consistently insisted that he never felt anger toward his co-stars. He did not view their criticism as a personal attack. To him, they simply had a different vision for the show. Still, the emotional distance between them was undeniable. The Evans family on television represented unity and love in the face of hardship. But behind the scenes, the actors who brought that family to life were living very separate realities. When the criticism became public. As the popularity of Good Times continued to grow, the tension surrounding the character of J.J. Evans was no longer limited to private conversations behind the scenes. Eventually, the disagreement spilled into public interviews, where Esther Rolle and John Amos began speaking openly about their concerns. For Rolle, the issue was not simply about one character receiving more attention than the others. She believed the direction of JJ had started to contradict the purpose of the show itself. When Good Times first appeared on television, the series was praised for presenting a strong and realistic black family dealing with economic hardship in Chicago. The Evans family faced serious problems, unemployment, racism, and poverty, but they confronted those struggles together with dignity. As the show evolved, Rolle felt that the tone had begun to change. The more audiences responded to Jimmie Walker's comedic style, the more producers leaned into that energy. JJ's exaggerated reactions, flamboyant behavior, and comedic antics became the central focus of many episodes. Rolle worried that the character was drifting toward a caricature. In interviews given while the show was still on the air, she expressed her concerns in direct and sometimes uncomfortable language. She pointed out that J.J. was written as an 18-year-old young man who did not work and rarely behaved responsibly. The character's growing reputation as a loud comedian troubled her because she believed it could send the wrong message to young viewers watching the show. Rolle argued that the series had originally been designed to highlight the intelligence and ambition of the Evans children as well. The younger brother Michael had been introduced as a thoughtful and politically aware boy who often spoke passionately about social issues. Yet, as the show's scripts increasingly centered around J.J., the importance of those other characters seemed to shrink. For Rolle, this was not simply a creative disagreement. She believed television carried a responsibility, particularly when it portrayed minority communities that had historically been misrepresented in popular culture. If the most visible black character on television behaved like a clown, she feared that audiences might misunderstand the reality of black families across the country. John Amos shared many of these concerns. Like Rolle, he had initially been drawn to the project because it promised to present a realistic portrait of a struggling but determined family. Amos later explained that he believed the show was beginning to rely too heavily on exaggerated comedy instead of meaningful storytelling. He described the change bluntly in later interviews, saying the series had started drifting toward what he considered excessive buffoonery. Amos emphasized that his criticism was never about jealousy of Jimmie Walker. He respected comedians and admired anyone who could make audiences laugh. But he believed that the balance of the show had shifted too far. In his view, focusing almost entirely on J.A.J.'s jokes diminished the importance of the other members of the Evans family. Two younger children were growing up within the story, yet their development seemed secondary to the comedic moments built around Walker's character. The disagreement eventually became serious enough to affect the cast itself. Amos was the first to leave the show after a dispute with producers over creative decisions and contract issues. His departure shocked many viewers because James Evans had been such a central figure in the family. Not long afterward, Rolle also stepped away from the series for a period of time, frustrated with the direction it had taken. To the audience, these departures seemed sudden and confusing. The Evans family had been built on the idea of unity and resilience, yet two of its most important members were now gone. Meanwhile, Jimmie Walker remained the show's most visible star, still delivering the humor that had made J.J. Evans a household name. The catchphrase that launched his career continued to echo through American pop culture. But behind the laughter, the conflict over what Good Times was supposed to represent had already changed the relationships between the actors who brought the Evans family to life. Walker's response to the criticism. By the time the public criticism surrounding J.J. Evans reached its peak, Jimmie Walker was already living a life that looked very different from the rest of the cast of Good Times. While the show was filming during the day, Walker was simultaneously building a powerful career as a stand-up comedian. The sitcom gave him national exposure, but the comedy clubs gave him freedom. Every evening, once filming ended, he often left the studio immediately and headed to meet his writing staff or prepare for a performance. That schedule meant Walker spent far less time socializing with his co-stars than many fans might imagine. In fact, by his own account, he was so focused on stand-up that he barely noticed the growing controversy around his character while it was happening. Years later, Walker explained that he did not even realize how strongly Esther Rolle and John Amos had criticized J.J. in interviews. According to him, the person who first showed him those comments was Sal Manna, the co-writer of his memoir, Dynamite: Good Times, Bad Times, Our Times. When Walker finally saw the statements, he said the discovery did not upset him as much as people expected. His reaction was surprisingly calm. Walker explained that he never saw their criticism as a personal attack. To him, the situation was simple. He had been hired to perform comedy, and he believed that was exactly what he delivered. When audiences laughed, he knew he was doing his job. Walker also emphasized that actors do not control the direction of television shows. Writers and producers decide how characters develop, which scenes receive the most attention, and what tone the series will take. If the producers chose to emphasize J.J.'s humor, that was their decision, not his. Walker was simply performing the material that had been written for him. In later interviews, he repeatedly clarified that he respected the talents of Rolle and Amos, even though they disagreed about the show. He described both actors as extremely skilled performers whose work helped shape the success of the series. At the same time, Walker acknowledged that the show had become an uncomfortable environment for everyone involved. When creative disagreements reach that level, it becomes difficult for a cast to function like a close family. People arrive on set, do their work professionally, and leave. Personal relationships rarely develop in those circumstances. Walker's perspective was also shaped by the nature of comedy itself. Stand-up comedians are trained to respond to audience reactions instantly. When crowds laugh at a joke, the performer naturally builds more material around that moment. Walker applied the same instinct to his character on television. If audiences loved J.J.'s exaggerated expressions and energetic delivery, then it made sense to lean into that style. From his point of view, the character succeeded because viewers enjoyed it. That success eventually turned J.J. into one of the most recognizable figures on television. The catchphrase, "Dinno might," became a cultural symbol of the decade, repeated by fans who may never have seen the full series. Walker has often suggested that the real tragedy of the situation was not the criticism itself, but the division it created within the cast. He believes the show might have lasted much longer if everyone involved had found a way to accept the direction the series had taken. In one interview, he compared the situation to successful music groups that eventually fall apart because members stop working together. When success arrives, disagreements can quickly grow into permanent fractures. Looking back, Walker seems less interested in revisiting the conflict than in acknowledging the complicated reality of making a hit television show. From the outside, Good Times appeared to be a warm and supportive family story. But behind the scenes, the actors who portrayed that family were navigating very different expectations about what the show should represent. And those differences ultimately changed the course of the series itself. Looking back after decades after Good Times left television screens, the story behind the Evans family has taken on a new perspective. Time has softened some of the tension that once surrounded the show, and the surviving cast members have occasionally reunited at fan conventions and television specials. For Jimmie Walker, those moments offered a chance to reflect on a chapter of his life that changed everything. Walker has often said that when people approach him today, the first thing they still mention is the same catchphrase that made him famous. Even after so many years, fans still smile when they hear the word "Dinno might." The character of J.J. Evans remains one of the most recognizable figures from television of that era. Yet the conversations Walker has with fans now often include another topic as well: the tension that once surrounded the show. Many viewers grew up believing that the actors who played the Evans family shared a deep bond behind the scenes. When stories about disagreements between Walker, Esther Rolle, and John Amos began circulating years later, some fans were shocked. Walker's candid interviews helped clarify what had actually happened. He explained that while the actors were not close friends, that distance did not erase the respect he had for them as performers. Rolle, he acknowledged, was deeply committed to portraying strong black women on television and took that responsibility seriously. Amos brought intensity and pride to the role of James Evans, creating one of the most memorable fathers in television history. Walker has also suggested that the disagreements were ultimately about creative vision, rather than personal hatred. Rolle and Amos wanted the show to remain a serious exploration of family life in a struggling community. Walker approached the role from the perspective of a comedian whose job was to entertain. Those two approaches were never completely compatible, but both came from genuine beliefs about what television should accomplish. Over time, the story of Good Times has become more complicated than the simple family comedy many viewers remember. The series still stands as an important milestone in television history because it introduced millions of viewers to characters dealing with real social problems. At the same time, the behind-the-scenes conflict revealed how difficult it can be to balance social commentary with entertainment. In later years, former cast members occasionally crossed paths again at public events. One such reunion brought several actors together decades after the show had ended. For many fans, seeing them share the stage again was a reminder of how powerful the series had once been. The actors themselves acknowledged that while disagreements had existed, the show still created something meaningful for audiences. Walker has also reflected on how easily successful creative teams can fall apart. When a television show becomes popular, every decision becomes more complicated. Writers, producers, and actors may all have different ideas about the direction of the story. Without compromise, even a successful project can begin to fracture from within. Looking back now, Walker does not appear interested in reigniting old arguments. Instead, he treats the experience as part of the complicated reality of working in television. The Evans family that viewers loved was fictional, but the impact of the show was real. It gave audiences memorable characters, unforgettable catchphrases, and conversations about social issues that television had rarely addressed before. So after all these years, the truth behind the rumors seems clearer. The cast of Good Times worked together professionally, but the close family bond viewers saw on television did not fully exist behind the scenes. What do you think about Jimmie Walker's perspective? Do you believe the show should have focused more on JJ's comedy, or should it have stayed centered on the entire Evans family? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories from classic television.